All right, I think we're probably good to begin. Welcome, everybody. Probably still have some people joining tonight. Welcome to Introduction to Socialism and Capitalism, led by NPEC, the National Political Education Committee for DSA. My name is Evan. I'm calling in from Orange County, Mid-Hudson Valley, New York. We have two great speakers tonight. We have Peter Frase, author of Four Futures, and Hadas Thier, the author of A People's Guide to Capitalism. I'm going to pass it off to Per to introduce himself, and then Per, you can give it to David, and then pass it back to me, and I'll give it to Tom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Per, he, him, Boston, DSA. David?
I'm David Kotz. I'm a member of the National Political Education Committee of DSA and the River Valley DSA chapter in Western Massachusetts. Tom?
Hello, all. My name is Tom Hansberger. I'm a member of NPEC, National Political Education Committee, and also a Milwaukee DSA. Back to you, Evan.
All right, thank you. So if you're joining us for tonight's program, you're just joining now. Again, we have two great speakers, Peter and Hadas. We are going to start with a brief introduction from both of them. Once they've had the chance to introduce themselves, then Tom will be so kind as to moderate a discussion between them, asking some basic questions about what is socialism, what is capitalism. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit about how to break down some very complex topics into very simple wording for comrades and non-DSA members alike. So with that, Tom, I'm going to pass it off to you. Just so everybody knows, there will also be a Q&A session towards the end, so do look forward to that, and you're welcome to submit questions throughout the entire duration of the event. All right, so with that, Tom, go right on ahead.
Thanks, Evan. Just so you know, we are taking audience questions tonight. We're going to have about 40 minutes of discussion before that. If at any time you have a question that you think would be good for us to ask Hadas or Peter or both, please use the Q&A button if you're on Zoom down at the bottom. It should be on the toolbar. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and ask Hadas, please introduce yourself, your body of work, any thoughts on socialism and capitalism before we get into the rest?
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the National Political Education Committee. This is an exciting event to get to be part of. Yeah, so my name is Hadas Thier. I've been an activist and a socialist for about 20 plus years. I'm the author of A People's Guide to Capitalism, which provides a Marxist lens into the political economic system that we live under, capitalism, which is obviously what we're here to talk about along with socialism. And, we'll talk more about the specifics of how we define capitalism in this discussion. And I think that's a really important thing for us to do, not as like an academic exercise, but because, you can't effectively tackle a problem without understanding it, right? Where did capitalism come from and why? What keeps it in place? What makes it tick? What are its contradictions? If you want to build an effective opposition to a world owned and controlled by the 1%, you need to know what you're up against. So, there are some good and interesting debates about how we define the system and different aspects of the system, points of emphasis, et cetera. But generally speaking, those debates, if you're having them well, are grounded in reality, right? We live in a capitalist society, so you can debate the details, but you have some concrete evidence to measure things against. I think defining socialism, which we'll get to do more in the discussion, is a bit more murky because I would argue we don't have like actually existing socialism right now. We have socialistic policies and some countries that have pursued more or less of those policies, but in the context of a capitalist global world order that dominates, every aspect of society and constantly works to undermine and limit whatever socialistic policies or experiments and so on take place. So that doesn't make the discussion any less important. It's all the more critical that a movement of socialists that's, finally growing in this country after many difficult decades for the left, try to work out not only a vision of what socialism could look like, but also how do we think we might get there? I don't think these are easy answers, to any of those questions. I don't think they can be tackled in a single conversation, but it's part of a process that I think as the left and as socialists and as members of DSA, we need to get much better at and get more rigorous in tackling collectively. I think at the very least, if we're going to win people to joining our movement, we can't just invite them to struggle against something. We have to have a vision that is, what we're for, and we have to have enough confidence in what that is and how we might get there for it to begin to make the case that this is, a plausible option for working people in this country to be part of, not just kind of a pie in the sky, fanciful thinking. So I'm really excited to get to be part of this discussion. I think it's really important that it's happening. And my goal is to contribute what I can, but more importantly, to learn alongside all of you here.
Thank you so much, Hadas. We're happy to have you here with us as well. Peter, same question. Please introduce yourself. Any opening thoughts about socialism and capitalism about this conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So yeah, I'm Peter Frase, coming to you from, same as Evan, the Mid-Hudson Valley of New York, Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, the city of Newburgh in my case. And yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I first started considering myself a socialist when I was maybe around 15, which would have been back in the mid-90s. So that tells you how old I am. And that was not a time when when there was a lot of socialism around. My initial, in terms of understanding capitalism and the need for an alternative to capitalism, my starting point is what I learned from going to the Minneapolis public schools, not from my teachers, but from observing the class and race inequalities around me that were manifestly not based on anything that anybody did or deserved, but based on the different positions that we occupied in the society that we lived in. And so that started me on the path of deciding either you find up with a rationalization for those inequalities, or you decide that they have no rationale and they need to be overturned. And so I came to believe that, socialism was the name that I chose for the project of human emancipation, because capitalism is central to what makes us not free and what makes us unequal in the society that we live in. And without contesting it and overturning it, any real project of liberation and emancipation is impossible. I'm also glad to be here because, I came to also believe, at first, I would say because again, the mid-90s was a downtime for socialism, and Minneapolis was not exactly a hotbed, at least at the parts of it that I was experiencing. I was what I would call a socialist of the HX section, meaning that I read books in the library from the Marxist section. That's HX is the Library of Congress code. But I eventually met socialists, initially not DSA. My initial experiences were with remnants of what's called the New Communist Movement. But I joined DSA in 1998 at the University of Chicago. Not because I thought they had the exact perfect analysis of capitalism and socialism. In fact, quite the opposite, because DSA was open to sort of idiosyncratic people like me with slightly different perspectives on socialism, not interested in sort of doctrinal purity so much as being organizing and being in motion and being engaged with the politics that was happening at the time. And I believe the old Debs line, an unorganized socialist is a contradiction in terms. You've got to be a part of something. So I joined DSA in 1998, and I've been there, and I was still there when all of a sudden this organization that I thought would eventually just die out suddenly exploded into this totally different thing that it is today. And along the way, I was one of the original editors of Jacobin magazine, which is also because I knew the original Jacobin people through DSA. And I wrote a book called For Futures, which attempts to talk through some sort of basics of socialist and Marxist theory in a popularized way, also engaging with speculative fiction, science fiction, not to predict what the socialist or dystopian future will look like, but to open up some vistas on how we can imagine how things are and how things might be different. So I'm looking forward to having a little more of this conversation about what is the system that we live in called capitalism, and how might we imagine socialism both as a goal and as a movement. So yeah.
Awesome. It's funny. I also am a UChicago alum and became a socialist while studying at the University of Chicago. So that's something we share in common. That's very, very interesting. Didn't know that. So on to the first question. And that is, I think, a question that's on everybody's minds. How do we define capitalism, and what is so problematic about it? In other words, What is capitalism and why does it suck? Hadas, go ahead.
Sure. So capitalism is a political economic system, right? That's based on private ownership of the means of production. And all that's meant by means of production is the means to produce things, right? The factories, office buildings, land, software, et cetera. All these things are monopolized in the hands of the few. And that was really the historical basis for capitalism. It gained its first foothold in England through what was called the enclosure movements, which basically expropriated masses of people from their land and their means to produce for themselves and their families. And in this way, through the violent expulsion of masses of people from their land, a class of people was created over time that have no way to sustain ourselves except but to work for someone else. So I'm a Marxist, and that's sort of like my the window through which I look at these things. And Karl Marx defined capitalism as a social relation of production. And what he meant by that is that profits aren't the result of good accounting tricks or the inventive ideas of the super rich, but instead they're the outcome of an exploitative relationship between two classes of people, bosses and workers. And that exploitation is what makes the system tick. And it's based on that structure of private ownership over the means of production, because the fact that the vast majority of people in our society don't have an independent means to produce for ourselves, to sustain ourselves and our families, forces us to have to enter into an exploitative relationship with our bosses. We're told that we have the freedom to work where we want, but ultimately, whether we work for this boss or that boss, we have the choice of working for someone else or starving. There are obviously some people who are self-employed, and that's usually a precarious position to be in. But this really exists at the fringes of the economy. The vast majority of society is made up of working people who have to work for someone else in order to subsist and survive. And so in our society, bosses and workers meet each other on this very unequal playing field where one owns the means to produce value and the other has no choice but to sell their labor in order to live. And no matter how, essential workers are suddenly, discovered to be in mainstream discourse, the bosses control the terms of our employment, our hours and conditions, what it is we produce, and then they get to control the fruits of our labor at the end of the day. So they take home the profits and we take home our wages, which is generally a small fraction of what it is that we've produced. So the example that I use in my book and that I often use to explain how exploitation works is Starbucks, which is mostly because it's a simple and straightforward example. But today, as Starbucks workers are beginning to unionize, it's all the more relevant. So, let's say they pay you $120 for an 8-hour shift at Starbucks. But you can probably, in most cases, make $120 worth of fancy coffee drinks in an hour or two. But you can't then, after 2 hours, throw down your towel and say, well, fair is fair. I've made back the money you paid me. Your labor is theirs for another 6 hours. And the rest of your shift, you're basically working for free. And that extra value produced during this stolen time is what Marx called surplus value. And it's the basis of capitalist profits. So, what's problematic about capitalism, in my opinion, is basically everything. We live in this incredibly beautiful world that's rich with life and resources. We're lucky to be human beings who have these complex minds full of creative potential, full of, love and connection. All of this beauty very jarringly exists alongside of incredible pain and suffering and exploitation, divisions, and not to mention, just the trajectory of planetary destruction that we're on. Capitalism, systematically destroys both planetary and human potential, because both human beings and the planet are basically inputs into a production process for profits. And, at the heart of most of the great problems on Earth is capitalism, a system which not only exploits the majority of humanity and the planet for the sake of profits, but it also compels capitalists to continue to grow and accumulate profits no matter what in order to stay competitive way past the point of what is sustainable for the planet. We live in a system that subordinates every decision made in our society to a very simple metric of is it profitable or not. We're seeing that at play with a climate disaster, which is just simply not profitable to effectively address. We see it very plainly in terms of the response or non-response to the pandemic. Bidding wars for masks and ventilators and vaccines instead of a global cooperation, insisting on keeping businesses and schools open under any condition in order to restore full economic activity. This is capitalism is kind of laid bare before us more and more every day.
Thank you, Hadas. Yeah, really, interesting point about how capitalism got started. Many people aren't aware that the commons was a thing before it was closed off from public use. So, Peter, same question. What is capitalism and why is it so problematic?
Sure. So, well, as I think will probably happen, I'm going to, I'm largely agree with the overview that Hadas gave. I'll try to sort of get at some, maybe I'm inevitably going to repeat a little bit, but I'm going to maybe phrase things in a slightly different way or emphasize some different things. So, I look at, the historical background is important. I think when we look at capitalism as the sort of, as a sort of contemporary system, we're talking about this opposition between capital and wage labor, in which capital exists to accumulate and must exploit wage labor in order to do so. And I think, the explanation of exploitation that Hadas gave is entirely correct and is central to certainly a Marxist account of capitalism. One thing that I think is important to understand is that, exploitation often, because of the vernacular ways that people understand that term, the sort of in Marxist discourse, exploitation is sort of a technical term. It has to do with the phenomenon that Hadas described, where you do your shift at Starbucks and sell $100 worth of coffee and get in an hour and get $10 or $15 or whatever it is in wages. But that can sometimes lead people, I think, to the conclusion that, well, the problem with capitalism is that I'm not getting enough of a share of this process, and it would be just if I just if the workers just got a bigger share. Which is not to say that demanding a bigger share is not a big part of socialist politics, as I think we'll get to later. It obviously is, but that doesn't change the fundamental relationship of unfreedom here, which is that workers have no choice but to work for someone who has the capital to employ them, because they have no other means. We have no other means to secure our means of subsistence. And obviously it's better to make a higher wage than a lower one. But raising the wage in and of itself does not change that fundamental relation of domination and unfreedom. And so I think in understanding both what is the problem with capitalism and what it means to get beyond it, I think it's important to recognize that it is the sort of institution of wage labor itself, that fact that we have to sort of give away our freedom. We're forced to give our freedom away in order to get the wages we need to survive, that is fundamental to the problem here. And then on the other side, the problem of capital is not just the problem that wealth is extremely concentrated in a few private hands. That is a problem. Although I would argue there's ways of abstractly, at least, understanding capitalism as a process that does not even require that. But obviously that is the way contemporary capitalism works. And so that's a problem, but it's not just that they have a lot and we have a little. It's also, as Hadas also talked about, that these decisions, these small number of capitalists and the aspects of the state that support them are guiding the use of social wealth in a direction that is oriented toward making money, that is oriented toward accumulating more capital, right? This is the fundamental distinction of capitalism. Capitalism is taking wealth and using it to make number go up, to accumulate more wealth, rather than to put it toward any democratically or otherwise decided social purpose. And that is what makes it capital. I think it's important to understand capital, to me at least, in the view I take, capital is not a thing. It's a relation and it's a process and a way of organizing society, so that a big pile of money, you can't just look at that and say it's capital. A factory, you can't look at it and say that's capital. If I have a big pile of money in a factory, if I use the money to throw a party for my friends in the factory, that's not capitalism. If I use the money to hire them to make things for me in the factory and then sell those things to make more money and continue to reinvest those profits, that's capitalism. It's, you know, it's value in motion, as Marx said. And it's that leads to so many of these dynamics where the health of the environment and of the earth is thrown aside because that's irrelevant to the process of capital accumulation, in which human needs are irrelevant if they're not profitable. That is the system of capitalism that I think, you know, when we look at capital on the one side and wage labor on the other side, we see value in motion for accumulation rather than human need. And we see workers in a position of being dominated and unfree and forced to work for others for the sake of keeping this machinery of accumulation going. And it is breaking that relation and that system that I see as central to the socialist project.
Thank you. You know, I think that your comments, Peter, speak to some deep questions that we want to address here as well. But you know, one thing that I think you're right to point out is that capital is a process, not just a pile of money, as you put it, right? And as Marx discusses, it's only capital. Capital only becomes capital once someone with a hoard of wealth reinvests that in order to try to grow their wealth, inevitably by exploiting other people. But I think this leads us to a really important question. You know, it's not just about slightly higher wages or mild reforms, right? It's about something bigger than that. So I want to touch on that question by asking, what is socialism and how is it different from social democracy? So Peter, I'll kick it back to you since I think this touches on part of your answer.
Yeah, so socialism versus social democracy. I mean, first of all, what is socialism? Socialists typically hate answering this question because it gets into this problem of, if we believe, you know, if you believe as I do that socialism is, you know, in one way defined as the project of human emancipation, and that must be democratic and collective. For me, as the, you know, the blabbermouth up here, to tell you what socialism is would be contrary to the process of people making their own history through the actual unfolding of politics and masses in motion. You know, and there's famous lines from Marx where he says this, very early on in the German ideology. He says, communism is for us not a state of affairs which is to be established, an ideal to which reality will have to adjust itself. We call communism the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. The conditions of this movement result from the premises now in existence. And toward the end of his life, reacting to some of the reviews of Capital from French utopians, he made fun of them for criticizing him just because he said, he says, I imagine I confine myself to the mere critical analysis of actual facts instead of writing recipes for the cookshops of the future. And so we're always mindful of not writing recipes for the kitchens of the future, I think. But I do tend to think of, socialism orients itself at least around sort of fundamental demands for a way of organizing society that is different from what I just described in terms of the capital relationship between capital and wage labor. And that means that the great wealth that exists in our society should be put toward the satisfaction of human needs: food, shelter, healthcare, education, and so on, and fundamentally toward free time, toward the time where people have both the time and the resources to make use of that time to develop themselves, to do what they wish, to do something other than work for someone else for a wage. And now, that's sort of a horizon. It's not a set of policy proposals. And in one of the tricky things, I think, in terms of answering this question of what's the difference between a socialist and a social democrat, there's different ways I could answer it. One way to answer it is, a social democrat is someone who's interested in the project of essentially humanizing capitalism, of giving people guaranteed health care, guaranteed education, minimum wages, all that sort of thing that has happened under capitalism, is clearly possible under capitalism, but in many ways also presupposes that capital accumulation continues as it is now, because it relies on economic growth to create the profits and then the taxation that funds a welfare state. And that doesn't fundamentally challenge those property relations, the fact that the ownership of wealth and the control over investment is concentrated in the hands of the capitalist class and a capitalist state. And so the sort of socialist horizon beyond that would be one in which we actually, those things are challenged. And here, there's a complicated question about, what does that look like? I think a lot of people in terms of in pop culture or in what you learn in school have the imagination, well, socialism means the government, owns everything, nationalizes everything. And I think, in fact, there's a more complicated set of questions we have to ask about what are the alternatives to the capitalist form of economic organization. In some cases, nationalization may be the answer, like if we're talking about the power grid and taking it out of the hands of private monopolists and putting it towards, satisfying human need and addressing the climate crisis. In other cases, it may be more of a form of a socialization of setting or, of allowing sort of worker cooperatives or other kinds of, more decentralized forms of non-capitalist or potentially non-capitalist ways of doing this. And then there are other things that's, there are forms of aspects of the economy that simply need to be abolished, whether we're talking about, private health insurers or debt collectors or the police. So I think that those are the sort of the questions that a socialist has to address, even though in practice today in 2022, for me and most people in DSA, I think our day-to-day work is social democratic in the sense that we are demanding reforms in capitalism that we think are at least to some degree winnable in capitalism, even if what we're trying to do is to point ultimately beyond that. And I think my view of social democracy and of all those the kinds of class compromises that arise in struggling for reforms under capitalism are always inherently unstable and pushed to a point, as we've seen in previous periods, say in the crisis of the 1970s, you invariably reach a point where the working class is sufficiently strong, capitalist profitability is sufficiently constrained that you have to either move toward a rupture with capitalism or, as we saw in the 1970s, a reactionary movement that pushes the working class back down, cuts back the gains that have been made. And so that is the dynamic that I think socialists have to be mindful of and have to be thinking of strategically as we try to figure out how to fight for reforms while also thinking beyond capitalism.
Thank you, Peter. So it's a movement that points beyond itself, even though we are currently struggling for more immediate demands. So a little bit of a puzzle here. Hadas, question for you. What is socialism? How is it different from social democracy? Maybe you can help us out.
Okay, great. Well, I think what Peter said is great. And I would just add, I sort of said this earlier, right? But it's a funny comparison to talk about capitalism and socialism because one actually exists. And so you can talk about it very concretely, and then, socialism doesn't quite exist, or bits and pieces of it, socialistic policies and so on. And so it makes it kind of murky thing to have to pin down and define. And I think there's a lot of really interesting and good discussions and debates about any number of questions around what socialism is, how we get there, et cetera. And I think, there are a lot of really good ideas. This is sort of getting at what Peter was saying, where we can't just imagine, what we think socialism will be and create that in advance. There's a lot of really good ideas, I think, about how society could be structured if it wasn't done on the basis of profits. And it's not to say that we shouldn't have those ideas. I think that's important. And it's important because it highlights what is possible, and what we have, the material conditions, the science, the resources, all these things exist to make a very different kind of a world. I remember a few years back, I went to this exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, where they had commissioned a few architectural firms to design models for towns in different parts of the country, which would incorporate, themes of affordable housing with economic and ecological sustainability. They had one project based in Orange, New York, which is a town that doesn't have, public transportation within it, but it's located along the regional New Jersey transit line. So the architects developed this model pedestrian city centered on the transit stop that basically gets rid of the roads and cars and fills in the space with these mixed use buildings and includes affordable housing and commercial and office space and public green spaces and so on. It was a very cool thing to look at. People work in walking distance from where they live. You get rid of streets, which are an economic burden on a struggling city, and cars, which are an ecological burden, obviously, on the planet, so on and so forth. There are a bunch of cool things about it. But the point being is that, we have there's no lack of inventive and well-researched ideas to tackle every one of the social ills created by capitalism. We have, all of the tools to actually rid the world of poverty, to build the material foundations that undermine division and bigotry. And it's often talked about that what's missing is kind of like the political will to make these things happen. And that's true. But I think beneath the question of political will is the fundamental structure of capitalism that we talked about before, right? Private ownership over the means of production and the fruits of the production process. A small number of people determining what we do and how we do it, making decisions that on the basis of maintaining and growing their own power. So a sort of definitional starting point for socialism is, whereas capitalism is based on a private ownership over the means of production, socialism is based on the collective ownership and democratic control over the economy. That the people who produce society's goods and services are the ones that should be, democratically deciding what we produce, under which conditions, what to do with the fruits of our labor. In a nutshell, socialism is workers' power instead of corporate power. And I think it's an important, point to emphasize as democratic socialists that we're not just talking about collective ownership in the state of, in the sense of state ownership, right? You could have, state-run economies that are totally top-down and autocratic, and that doesn't bring us any closer to socialism. But we're talking about collective and democratic control over the economy. That there have been, states that have had state-led economies, but have resembled basically state capitalist regimes rather than socialist ones. So you have the state rather than an unregulated market managing a process still of exploitation, as we were talking about just before, right? That capitalism is a social relationship of exploitation. So in short, a society in which workers are in power rather than the elite few is the vision of socialism. The decisions that impact the vast majority of society should be made by the vast majority of society. And that has to include full economic democracy, because we can't have political democracy without economic democracy. I think there's a lot more to say about, social democracy. And I think Peter spoke to some of it. I'll just say, because I think I'm probably running at time, but I'll just say a couple very brief things about it, which is that, if you think about like the height of social democracy, like in the early 70s, we produced some of the most egalitarian societies in modern history, generous welfare states, a decent standard of living and low levels of income inequality and unemployment. All those things are very, very good. And I would way prefer to live in a social democratic society than like American style, like let it rip free market type of society. Not just as a matter of personal preference, although I, would much prefer having healthcare and paid leave than not. But, these are life and death things, whether people are left to die outside a hospital door because they're uninsured, or children are allowed to go hungry in the richest country in the world, and so on. But I think that, the issue then is that we should, as, socialists, go all in for fighting for these kind of reforms, at the same time that we also build towards something that's deeper and more radical. Because, both because we could have so much more, but also just fundamentally, like history has shown us that maintaining a stable welfare state in the face of a still entrenched power of capital is not realizable. That's not a long-term solution. And that's really been the experience of Western social democracy, where, while there's a mobilized working class and while the economy was flush, like in the post-war period, that made reforms more possible at the height of social democracy. But then in periods of economic downturn and like a boss's offensive, that created the conditions in which many of those reforms were rolled back and actually took a neoliberal turn. So I think, to respond to economic crisis and capital on the offensive requires a more radical socialism to go further than what the bosses ultimately are willing to go.
Thank you. Those are great points. And in particular, I was really interested in what you had to say about how decisions are being made, economic democracy and political democracy as both being equally important parts of socialism. I think one thing we've all noticed, if you're on the call, you've likely noticed this, that the institutions of government and the economy just seem to end up playing out in such a way that the wealthy and powerful end up even more wealthy and even more powerful. If we actually have control and the government is answerable to us ordinary working class people, that will not be the case, right? So where the power lies is so important. We have only about 7 minutes left. So in 3 minutes or so, I want to ask one more big question, a practical question, which is, in your view, what has DSA been doing that has been most effective, and what should we all be doing going forward? So Hadas, I'll kick this over to you first.
Okay, great. Well, I think this is definitely one of those things where I'm humbled by the experience of DSA, and I mentioned earlier, I've been a socialist for a long time, but I've only been a member of DSA for a couple of years. So I certainly do not envision myself as having, all the big answers to those questions. But I think, one thing that I really appreciate about what DSA has done and increasingly does more and more really well is this idea of like an inside-outside approach, right? That we have in the long run a two-pronged struggle where we can contest for power within the state through elections and legislative reforms, and then also building power outside of the state through social movements, workplace organizing, building institutions of direct democracy. And the goal is to do both, and to build enough, and that both for the purpose of building enough organizational and political strength to take on an entrenched corporate elite. So you have, like, on the one hand, socialist legislators that can give confidence to movements and can implement, at least some reforms that help to shift the terrain in favor of workers' organization. And then you have, on the other hand, like bases of popular power outside of the state that allow socialists to push the political processes further than, state bodies are willing to go without mass pressure. So I think that, we're at the beginning stages of that process in a lot of ways, but I think that, DSA going all in on Bernie's campaigns helped to mobilize much greater numbers of people into political life. I think that some of the work that local DSA electeds have done, working with DSA chapters and grassroots organizations to win local reforms, has been really, really great. Here where I live in New York, some of the elected socialist officials, along with the DSA chapters, were instrumental in winning, tax the rich, progressive taxation, helped lead a coalition that stopped a gas fracking plant recently here in Queens, ongoing work among housing activists for better tenants protections that has then been amplified and pushed forward by socialist electeds in Albany, and so on and so forth. So I think that has been really effective, and I think that we can do much more of that. I think we're at the beginning stages, and I think for each member and each chapter, things look differently in terms of what opportunities there are. But I think DSA chapters are involved in a lot of different work, and finding the place where each person and each chapter can contribute whether that's through the chapter or working groups and so on, to be part of collective discussions, to continue to learn and debate with each other in comradely ways about, what the priorities should be, and so on. And then ultimately to kind of be able to keep our eyes on the prize about what kind of world it is that we're fighting for, who else we can get involved, who else we can collaborate with in order to get there, and ultimately, for the fight for a better world.
Inspiring words. Peter, the same question, that is, what has DSA been doing that has been most effective, and what should DSA and DSA members be doing in the immediate future to build towards socialism? So over to you before audience questions after this.
Sure. So, well, unlike us, I've been in DSA for more than 20 years. And so compared to most of that time, everything DSA is doing looks fantastic. I was in this organization for a long time when it was 6,000 members, most of whom were, over 65 years old. So that's all great. I mean, I think all the things that I said are true. I mean, DSA is probably most famous for its electoral work. Obviously, the Bernie campaign was a huge jumpstart to modern DSA. I do think, though, and I'm speaking mostly from the perspective of my own local context in my chapter, DSA has been better than some of the kind of national or internet debates would lead you to believe at creating a space where we do good electoral work, but that we don't become simply an electoral operation or an appendage of a politician's office, and that people who are doing mutual aid work and forging connections on the ground in people's lives are doing that work and doing it in relationship to the people that are doing the policy work, doing the electoral work. I think that that's something DSA has. It's difficult and it doesn't always work, but I do think people underestimate sometimes the degree to which that does happen, and it's very valuable. I want to say too, I think something that is maybe a little more abstract, but that I think is very important about what DSA is and what it does. One of which is providing the kind of ideological structure that we're sort of filling out here that binds people to a politics that goes beyond individual candidates or campaigns or policies, understanding something that's going to keep us in it for the long haul. I wouldn't be here, 25 plus years later after calling myself a socialist if I didn't have a sort of framework to link together what, the individual struggles that I'm involved with on a day-to-day to a larger project. And I think DSA provides that in a way very few organizations in the United States left can. I also think it's very important in just creating a space where people are engaged in collective projects of solidarity together, which keeps people grounded in what real politics is about and not get sucked into like internet rabbit holes. I find that people who are bound to an actual work of a chapter are not running off on some like force the vote nonsense or whatever, because they're already in contact, in solidarity with people doing work on the ground. And that's really, really important. And I don't think we should underestimate that. And in terms of what people should be doing, I would say two things. One thing is just sort of like get involved in the organizing, but also get involved in stuff like this, the political education component. If you're somebody like me, who's a socialist of the HX section, likes the books, likes the theory, get out there and knock doors, or do, go out there, serve food at the mutual aid event, whatever it is, make the phone calls, and vice versa. If you're somebody who's just out there in the trenches every day doing the work, maybe come and bring some of the insight you learned from that back to the spaces where we can stand back and reflect and build that ideological structure that's going to keep us going in the long run. And finally, just, do all that unglamorous work of organizing that's not public and not fancy, whether it's making the calls, maintaining the, the spreadsheets, providing childcare, giving rides, all that kind of stuff, which again, I think is ultimately very rewarding, but also is like what makes our movement go and what makes it something, that goes beyond just some people talking on a Zoom call, as fun as that is, to something that can actually challenge capitalism and change the world, as grandiose as that sounds.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a great note to move into audience questions on. As someone who also likes reading books, and especially books about socialist theory, I think it's an important call to remind folks who do like that side of socialism to get out there, start small, even with the text bank, a phone bank, whatever is manageable for you. But doing that work, being engaged in the organizing work of the chapter really does change your perspective and make more explicit, more concrete what it is that we're talking about in all of that theory. So in that spirit, moving into the questions, we've had many questions from the audience. I want to start us off with this question. How would you respond to someone who responds to the question of capitalism, to critiques of capitalism, with statements like, quote, "So you think people who work hard should make the same as people who don't work hard," end quote. Or more generally, I think the spirit of the question is, how do we respond to capitalist arguments? What are the most effective capitalist arguments, and how can socialists defuse those arguments? In particular, you think that people who work hard should make the same as people who don't work hard. Yeah. So over to you, Hadas. How would you respond to that question, to that answer, and more generally to capitalist arguments?
Sure. I like to just kick them in the shins. No, okay. So yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that actually under capitalism, the people who work the least are often the people that are rewarded the most, and vice versa. You know, we've had all this discussion since the pandemic began, where we're finally talking about the workers and the working class. That's something that is often missing in mainstream discussion in this country. But through the course of the pandemic, you know, we've been talking about essential workers, that grocery workers, delivery workers, logistic workers are much more central to making the system tick than, you know, the Jeff Bezos of the world and so on. And I think that is clear. But on the other hand, it's those same, you know, essential workers that have also been like spit out and hung out to dry, you know, that haven't been paid hazard pay, that are being forced to work in unsafe conditions, you know, all of these things, while Jeff Bezos, you know, gets joyrides to outer space and so on. So I think that, you know, if you're worried that that's a problem, that the people that, you know, work hard will be rewarded the same as the people that don't work hard, well, capitalism is a much bigger problem in that case for you than socialism. And I think, you know, the bigger point is that actually, if we lived, you know, it's the assumption that some people are lazy and some people work hard and all this stuff. There's so much that is, you know, read into that is really about capitalism and alienation, and so on and so forth, that it's hard for us to imagine a society that is actually democratically run, that meets people's needs, that has everyone participate and actually be part of deciding what kind of work they want to do, and you know, what's meaningful and fulfilling to them, and what makes the world a better place. You know, that people actually, it's a very human thing to want to work, and humans have done it for all of human history. But it's capitalism that kind of alienates us from work, and alienates us from any kind of creative and thriving work that we could do. You know, we have enough technology where actually all of us could work way less, and have much more leisure time. And I think, you know, I think we'll find that for the time that we do have to work, you know, where we're not totally alienated during that time, that actually people will work to the best of their ability.
Thank you, Hadas. There's a lot of, you know, a lot to unpack. There's so many important thoughts. But I just a minor point I want to comment on, because it is funny that advocates of capitalism will attack socialists for defending people who don't work, when in fact it is capitalism that rewards people who aren't working. I mean, the heads of corporations they're not in the office every day. They can just not go in one day and go play golf. They're not working. They're on the golf course, right? So let me kick the same question to Peter. How would you respond to someone who has these kinds of questions about socialism? And more generally, what are the best arguments that you've heard from our ideological opponents, and how would you respond to them?
Sure. So, I mean, my first reaction to this idea of like socialists don't want to reward people who work hard. What is the society that you are familiar with where people are rewarded for their hard work? Because I'm not. I've never encountered it. And also, but I would go further than that and say that hard work as such is not a virtue, and it is not something to be praised. There is necessary work, and we should value the people that do it, and do it all in an egalitarian way. But like the valorization of hard work as such is a part of the ideological mystification of capitalism that I think we have to break through. It's a way to just sort of convince people that their sort of suffering is somehow virtuous, and also to glamorize things that might be difficult but are also in no way worthy of praise. Look, I have no doubt that it takes a lot of hard work and planning and cleverness to figure out how to scam people out of their life savings with cryptocurrency or whatever, but I'm not interested in praising that. What I am interested in doing is figuring out how we can reduce the amount of work all of us have to do, and figure out how to share in a more just way and reward in a more just way the work that does have to be done, right? I don't want to reward the hard works, quote unquote, of my local police department. I would like to reward the hard work of the people who pick up my garbage. That's an important distinction, I think. And so I think actually getting, one of my favorite sort of dissident socialist essays is Paul Lafargue's The Right to be Lazy. So that's where I come at on these questions, is like the less hard work, the better, though I recognize that sometimes hard work has to be done, and we should share it in an egalitarian way. Beyond that, in terms of what are the arguments for capitalism, I still think, the arguments that come back most commonly and that are probably most appealing to people are that capitalism will make you free and make you rich, in the sense that capitalism gives you economic growth and that it gives you freedom compared to what's perceived to be the sort of state oppression or, kind of bureaucracy of socialism. And, there, I think it's just important to point out that economic growth, well, first of all, has not actually been that great in recent periods, and it's growth that benefits the rich, and that, going back to the work question, hard work does not in general pay off. Mostly the people who are rich stay rich and get richer. One of the geniuses of capitalism is you can always point to somebody that started from nothing and got rich, but that is not generalizable. That is not the way it works for most people. And in terms of freedom, well, in many parts, for most people, working people, you spend most of your waking hours in a situation, the workplace, where you are not free at all. And that's sort of the freedom at the heart of capitalism. And so the argument for it being a free society relies upon ignoring that big elephant in the middle of the room, which is the boss and the workplace. And so I think when you identify those two myths, sort of the myth that capitalism leads to prosperity and the myth that capitalism is the only system consistent with freedom, then you can start to sort of break down the ideological hold that it can still have on some people.
That was, I feel like you were on fire in that answer, Peter, particularly just pointing out that not all hard work is necessarily good. I mean, a hardworking scam artist might be even worse than a lazy scam artist, you could say, right? So really great answers. Really appreciate both of those. We have a couple of questions that have come in on how local chapters can navigate ideological disagreement, right? How can we avoid gridlock in local chapters? Often, we're all coming into this work, often not having a lot of experience in politics. I think that's one of the things that makes DSA great, but it also means that there's a learning curve in learning how to organize a chapter, how to get work done in political activism and organizing on the local level. So Yeah, Hadas, what would you say to someone about how to navigate those ideological disagreements, how to build a healthy chapter culture that can move strategically in their area?
Sure. I mean, one thing that I would say is just, before I was in DSA, I spent many years in an organization that I think was, did a lot of good work, but was also, I think, overly confident in having a particular, having the right answers. And I think ultimately that was a real disservice to both the organization, but also like the movement beyond, the movement in general. And that one of the things that I love about DSA is that there's room for all sorts of positions and disagreements. And I think that, it is both a strength, but it also means that, the onus is on us to be able to have comradely debates. And part of that is having more, of having certain humility, that there aren't like just right answers. Obviously, we want to get to the closest approximation of what we think will be effective. It's not just like any answer is fine or whatever, but that we want to approach every discussion and debate with a certain level of humility and a willingness to change positions and to learn. That's something that, I feel like I unlearned, a more rigid approach to, and really love about a lot of what happens in DSA within my branch and within, with other comrades. So I think that that's one thing as a general rule of thumb, right, is to treat your comrades as your comrades and keep your eyes on the prize of like who the enemy is, that we're trying to take on capitalism, not, that there are lots of debates that we could feel very invested in and that are, important, but that it's not your comrades or other people on the left that are the main problem. And so I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is just having some patience with ourselves, patience with our chapters as we learn this stuff, and ultimately, patience with the process more broadly. We would all love for class struggle to be explosive, and then it makes it much clearer, what our role is as socialists, to take part in those struggles and so on and so forth. And we are coming from a place in the United States in particular, where the left has really been hobbled for quite some decades, where the labor movement, working class struggles have been really beaten down. And so we're beginning to see coming out of that. And the last few years have been some really important steps forward. But we need to have a little bit of patience, a little bit of humility, and a lot of comradeliness to move forward.
Thanks, Hadas. I think that's a very thoughtful answer, and a reminder for us all to be patient with our comrades, with each other, because we all share that common enemy in the boss, right? So, Peter, same question: how can we best navigate ideological disagreements and avoid gridlock in chapters?
I guess, not to repeat things that I said, because I think that's all quite right. And I think learning to have comradely debate is a thing most of us, we've not had a lot of experience in other realms of our life with having sharp intellectual disagreement and sometimes getting the better of the argument and sometimes not, and moving on in a constructive way. And that's all, we have to just be mindful of that we're all learning that still. I think for me, what it comes back to in the context of something like DSA is maintaining that tie to our common political work collectively together. People always will talk about, theory and practice together, or praxis, or the dialectic of theory and practice. And like, that's a slogan that gets thrown around, but it's a real thing. And I think it's really important to think of these things in terms of, how does this relate to common work that we're doing? First of all, but also it's not to say that every ideological disagreement has to be immediately about the day's activism, but ideally you're having these disagreements with people who are also your comrades in struggle, the people that you are day-to-day working with. And I want to be mindful here not to say that, you have to do X amount of phone banks before you're allowed to have an ideological disagreement with someone. People are coming from different places, different capacities, different abilities to participate in different ways. I just think we should all be mindful all the time when we're having disagreements that we not let them become sort of untethered from the collective project that we are all hopefully trying to be engaged with each other. Because I think that it's a lot harder to let things become extremely bitter and personal if you are still seeing the person you're disagreeing with as someone you're also going out and doing the mutual aid event with on that Sunday, or going out and knocking doors with. I think that is the sort of material reality of what keeping theory and practice together looks like. And it's why, again, I think the culture of DSA chapters where people are in collective struggle together is much healthier than like what you see on Twitter, because it has that practice to bind people together and to keep those ideological disagreements from just sort of spinning out of control and becoming overly personalized.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another great point. Working together really in getting to know each other really helps to navigate disagreements that aren't personal attacks, understand where we just have a difference of opinion, and that's okay. So moving on to another theme that emerged from audience questions. I know this is on a lot of DSA members' minds. The reality is, we want to organize the entire working class, the multiracial working class, but DSA members are concerned about the fact that on the whole, the organization is not as diverse as the working class as a whole, right? We need to be better at organizing in communities outside of our own in order to address this problem. So Hadas, any thoughts? How can we address diversity in DSA? And are there any lessons to be learned from what we've already discussed?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I think it's a tough challenge because it is not just reflective of the state of DSA. It's reflective of the state of the left in general, which tends to be pretty segregated, and it's reflective of our society, right? The left reflects our society, which is deeply segregated. And so, there's not an easy shortcut through that problem. It's a challenge that we have to get better and better at addressing, but it's a challenge that we didn't create. It's a deeper problem that DSA and the left more generally is reflective of. One thing that I think is important is that the more that we become implanted in the neighborhoods, communities, and workplaces that we're in, the more we have the opportunity to actually change the composition of the organization, right? The working class itself, as you said, is a multiracial working class. And so the more we are implanted, the more we come to reflect that. And then I think the second part of that is that, there has to be special attention paid to making sure that we prioritize particular struggles and, particular political and ideological questions. During the eruption of Black Lives Matter protests last summer, I guess it's now the summer of 2020, the extent to which DSA chapters were able to throw themselves into those protests. I know in New York, that was a big priority and a huge part of what we did, continuing to kind of forefront those struggles, forefront the struggle here in New York around housing issues, and gentrification, good cause eviction, that where we can forefront the policies that most impact, the multiracial working class, we're able to, make a difference, and simultaneously help to change the composition of the organization as well.
Thanks. Over to you, Peter. Same question. Any lessons from what we've discussed so far on how to address diversity in DSA?
Well, yeah. So one thing that has not changed in all the time I've been in DSA is this question and this conversation, which in some ways I feel, reluctant to offer too bold an answer, because we have been struggling with it for, this has been a struggle in DSA for as long as I've been around. And I think, in part it's because of exactly what Hadas said. We live in a segregated society, and therefore the left is segregated as well. And there are no shortcuts to getting around that. I've always felt that it is the political work you do that will lead you into fighting alongside with, and therefore intermingling with, forces that do not reflect the demographic composition of DSA as it currently is. I think that's often a stronger road than, what can sometimes happen if you focus too narrowly on just sort of hitting a demographic target. It leads to tokenism. It leads to sort of a burden being put on people because they check a certain box for some oppressed minority that you feel is underrepresented, which is not to say we shouldn't be broadening and deepening who we're trying to recruit and how we're moving beyond the demographic bubbles that we may be in. But ultimately, the political work is what I think has to lead, and it has to recognize that it's not just about how we diversify our own organization, though we certainly should have that in mind, but how we diversify the sort of the coalitions that we're a part of, and are mindful of, being in struggles that put us in motion alongside the people who are the various parts of the broad working class that we see as the class that we are fighting on the side of. I wish I had. I wish there was a better explanation than that. I think there's other things to be said. Certainly, within the organization, it is also it is worth listening to the voices that maybe don't always get noticed, don't always aren't the people that are sort of like coming from the same background or coming from the same kind of premises. Because I think a mistake people make sometimes too is to say, well, this organization is just all like middle class white people, which whatever the disproportionalities of it, that's not the case, right? And so that's a way that people can be sort of made invisible and silenced even within the organization. You can just pay attention to people that are already your comrades within DSA, as well as looking to what is the work you're doing, who is that putting you in struggle alongside, and then letting that also lead to addressing this problem. But again, I think be humble and be sort of real about the fact that in a country in which white supremacy and racism is as deeply ingrained into the fabric of everything about American capitalism, these are all very, very hard problems that the left has been struggling with, throughout its entire existence in this country, and so we can't ignore it, and we can't try to pretend that there's a way around it. But we also have to be mindful that there's no shortcuts to addressing these questions.
Thank you for those important thoughts. You're right that we also don't want to overstate the problem, right? That can also be a way of making comrades of color, women of color who are members of DSA invisible, people from all different backgrounds invisible when they're already in DSA and doing work. I know that myself, because I often am taken for just, your vanilla white guy. And on my mother's side, I'm Nicaraguan, right? I am Nicaraguan American. So it's easy to overstate the problem. But I think that your point, Peter, is also really worth highlighting, which is that these problems are all related in American capitalism. so many women of color are working class. In fact, that's the majority of the working class, even, or plurality of the working class, at least. So that is to say that in organizing the working class, we're also building power to address those demands, those needs of those people. So that's one way that we build solidarity with everyone, regardless of our background, as a multiracial working class movement. But another question, that I noticed is about how to push through the hostile sort of ideological environment of the United States, right? There were questions about McCarthyism, anti-communist sentiment in the past. What can we take from this discussion to really inspire us in moving forward with this work in our chapters? So I'll kick it over to you first, Hadas. How can we overcome this ideology that's so often promoted in the mainstream media in the United States?
I mean, I think a big part of the job is being done for us by capitalism itself. I think more and more people, and especially the younger you go, are, I can't remember what the polls have shown. I think it's like more people have a favorable association with socialism and capitalism, like under the age, and this is what I can't remember which age it was, but in any case, the shift is moving towards socialism away from capitalism in terms of ideology, at least, not necessarily in terms of what people feel confident to organize around. I think that's kind of the bigger obstacle, but I think in terms of capitalism being laid bare, especially over the last couple of years through the pandemic, I think things, couldn't be clearer. And I think a lot of the holdover of McCarthyism, the Cold War, that those things don't really frame the politics for increasing numbers of people these days. People's and instead, what frames people's politics is climate change, pandemic, the utter failures of capitalism. On the negative side and on the positive side, I think Bernie's campaigns can't be underestimated in terms of popularizing socialism to a really much broader audience. I think that we're at a moment right now that is quite exciting, that has a lot of potential, and Peter and I are probably about the same age, judging from what you were saying, but it's like I've been organizing for a long time, and I can say that the kind of political discussions that take place, but also the kind of organizing that takes place, and the political sophistication of people who are much younger than I am. We're at a moment where actually there's a lot of potential and opportunities for us to move forward.
Thank you, Hadas. Yeah, I know the statistics show the majority of folks 18 to 29 have a favorable view of socialism in recent polls, which that is a dramatic change from the 2000s. So, I think one takeaway from your comments is just that the window for socialism is really opening for us right now, and we need to see the opportunity in that and the good news in that. So over to you, Peter, same question. How do we fight back against that American ideology of McCarthyism?
Yeah, so, I remember, back in the days when I first joined DSA, there were recurrent debates where people would say, we really shouldn't call ourselves socialists. It's just, people are going to red bait us and associate us with communism. And the counter argument to that was always, well, they're going to call us that anyway. Plus, we could adopt some other progressive or some other tag that will be rendered toxic in turn, and it also has the downside of meaning nothing basically and having no real connection to the sort of to the history that socialism as a term has. And I agree that that has become even more the case. Well, first, by the time they called Barack Obama a socialist, the game was pretty much up. It had lost sort of all of its power in a certain way as a charge. I think I think that, like Hadas said, capitalism is sort of doing our work for us here. And I think that, again, part of the value of what we're doing here, of the conversation that we've had here tonight, is to get some sort of fundamental, I don't want to say talking points because that sounds glib, but just sort of get to the fundamental, what is the problem with capitalism? What is socialism? Why do we care about it? Because I think back to, a conversation I had during election season this fall with one of the ladies from the local Democratic committee, who had gotten some propaganda from the local Republicans saying, oh, don't vote for this ballot initiative because it's what the socialists, it's what the Democratic Socialists of America want. And then she said, I went and I looked it up, what you guys are about and what you stand for. And that's what I believe too. So, I think if we're good enough at explaining ourselves, we can make that word and that history and that imagery and all of it a source of our power rather than a source of our weakness. I really believe that, and I think that's going to vary by context, and you have to learn different ways to have those conversations and different ways to sort of explain it. But I really do think that us being socialists, being forceful about what our critique of capitalism is and what our demands are and what our history and our movement is about, I think that is actually a source of power and not a weakness, and that we should recognize that and that we should embrace it.
Couldn't agree more, Peter. I think that very often it backfires when people red bait us, because it draws more attention to our ideas and the analysis that motivates it, right? I think to the folks who were asking on this question, how to push back against these kinds of glib answers, familiar answers to socialism, just break it down in terms of who holds the power, who is exploiting who, and people will start to get it from that perspective, because the fact is working people don't hold most of the power in their own lives, as we've all seen during the pandemic. But we've got just a few closing comments. I'm going to open it up to Hadas and Peter for anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't cover. Also, there was one minor question, Hadas, if you could also address this I think I know the answer, but someone in the audience was asking who the portrait is on your wall, who is depicted in that portrait. So closing thoughts, Hadas.
Okay, this is a painting that was made by Kevin Cooper, who was on death row, and it was part of a fundraiser for the movement to get him off of death row. The portrait is of Frederick Douglass, who is a famous abolitionist and ex-slave. I'm trying to think if there's anything that's been left unsaid. This has been a really fantastic conversation, and I appreciated both the questions and your comments, Peter, and your comments, Tom, as well. The only thing that I'll end on is that I think we need to have more of these discussions, both for the sake of political clarity and being able to talk to other folks that are newly coming around these ideas, but also because there's a lot left to discuss and to hash out and to theorize, and particularly when we talk about, what is socialism and how do we get there? This is just, part of a much longer conversation that we need to continue to have. And I, very much agree with the point that Peter made several times about, that those theoretical questions are tied into the practical work that we're doing. And we want to have a movement that doesn't have, theoretical minds and leaders over here and, people who do the work of the organization over there. We want to have an organization where everybody is, immersed in the politics and the theory and the practice. And that's why I think these kind of conversations are so important. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions, and feel free to stay in touch with me. You can find me on Twitter, Hadas Thier. You can look me up for some of the articles and my book, and you can find me in the central Brooklyn branch of DSA.
Thank you again for being with us, Hadas. And closing thoughts for you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for putting this on. Thanks for so many people for showing up. I don't know if he's still here, but I'm going to give a special shout out to my boy Tyler, who I know from way back in 1998 at the University of Chicago, who let me know that he was going to come to this event. He's back around DSA now in the Twin Cities chapter. So whenever I see somebody from the old school come around, I have to say what's up to them. I think, I hope we come away from this. What I would hope people would come away from this thinking about is, on the one hand, we need to understand the capitalist system in order to fight it. We need to understand how it works. We need to have a theory of it so that our individual day-to-day struggles don't just sort of run up against the structural obstacles that capitalism places in our way to prevent us from actually achieving anything. But also, let's keep our eye on that horizon, the socialist, or I would say even for myself, sort of the communist horizon of, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, a world in which, the free development of each is the condition for the full development of all, a world of freedom beyond the sort of the grinding necessity that, capitalism, and not just capitalism, also the physical material world we live in imposes certain constraints on us. But many of the constraints that we operate under are the ones that are imposed upon us by those who would enrich themselves by our labor and destroy the world in the process. And we can imagine that better world, and we can not only imagine it, we can fight for it. And that understanding capitalism and understanding what the socialist alternative to it is, that's the key to all of that. And so, yeah, you can also, I enjoyed this. I'd be happy to hear from people who want to continue the conversation. I'm on Twitter, PE Frase, PE and my last name. And yeah, my book is Poor Futures. Yeah, thanks so much, Tom, for keep shepherding this all along. And thanks to Hadas for being an excellent interlocutor for all of this. Hope to do it again sometime.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Peter. I'm going to hand things over to Evan for closing thoughts, follow up. Don't go away. There is some information about discussions if you're interested in continuing the conversation. So take it away, Evan.
Thank you. Yes, that was great, Peter and Hadas. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. So I'll make it quick. It's late by us. It's already almost 10 p.m., so I won't take up too much of anyone else's time. But we were interested in doing a discussion for this event. Obviously, very difficult with the number of people that we had tonight, wouldn't have been really possible. So we're doing something like an informal discussion to follow. I'm going to be sending a Google form in the chat. This does not guarantee you a spot in this discussion. We're planning on a discussion, I think it's February 9th, about 2 weeks from today, same time. So fill that out if you're interested in having a conversation with us and some other comrades and potentially non-members alike. There's probably going to be about 25 to 30 seats available for that Zoom discussion, which will be about 30 minutes to an hour long. Again, we can't guarantee, unfortunately, due to the number of attendees, that you'll be able to make it in. We do want to prioritize at-large members who may not have comrades to chat with in their own chapters. But definitely, I encourage you to fill out that form and let us know that you're interested in having a discussion. And we're definitely interested in doing more introductory stuff in the future. So again, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to Hadas and Peter. Tom, thank you. Did a great job tonight. Yeah, it's been phenomenal. Thank you.
Bye all.
Good night, everybody.